This says that they didn't shine. Right? Are you following? It says that the sun and the moon and the stars didn't shine. So here's something you can do at home. What if I have something like this and my eyesight is through this right here? You know those doggy collars that they put on the dogs? If I could put this over my head, I would. Right? Cones to keep them from biting themselves, right? If you can imagine this over the top of your head coming up, and it's pitch black, made out of black paper, and it comes up like this. What does that do to your field of view? It reduces your field of view, right? If I'm looking through this right here, the things that I was able to see over here, I can no longer see. Like right here, I can see up there. Here, like this, I can see like this. But when I've got this cone over my face, now my vision is like this, right? Without the cone, I can see lateral, peripheral, all the way down to the floor. With the cone, it forces my view to be restricted. I think what the scripture's saying here is that there is a lot of debris in the air, so much so that it raises the horizon. The sun and the moon and the stars aren't apparent. They don't appear because it's like one of those days where the dust is really flying and the sun is it's like the sun. You don't even see the sunset because it's behind all the clouds. If you can imagine, what's happening is the horizon is being raised because of the fires, because of the destruction, because of everything that's going on. There's so much debris in the air that the horizon has been elevated by 33%. You got 16.5 degree elevation on this side and a 16.5 degree elevation on this side. That's a third of the day where the sun will not shine, the moon will not shine, and the stars will not be visible because the debris in the air is so extreme. That I think is what this trumpet is speaking about. This is a sign to us that there probably has been the star that he saw that he thought was a star. I think it's probably a missile, and I think the destruction that's happening, there's probably just a lot of destruction that's happened at that point, and we just have a lot of debris in the air. That's how that third works. We're almost, and that's where we stopped, so I'll have to stop. I heard an angel fly through the midst of heaven, verse 13, saying with a loud voice, "Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth by reason of the other voices of the trumpets of the angels which are yet to sound." That's the end of chapter 8. So, here we are at the end of chapter 8. We've gotten through 7 seals, and we've gotten through the first 4 trumpets. What do y'all think? Maybe you have thoughts or questions?
I wanted to elaborate real quick while you were on that horizontal deal with the debris. Don't know if anybody's ever watched any of Ken Burns' documentaries, but he's an American historian that does some excellent documentaries, and he had one that told about the 30s and the Dust Bowl in particular. And many of us from the Midwest, of course, have had parents that lived through that, or grandparents. But at one point in that documentary, he talks about a dust storm that started in the Midwest, here in Kansas, Oklahoma, right here in the Midwest, and blew up a cloud of dust and carried across the whole nation of the United States all the way and blew into Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
That's a factual thing, so just elaborating on the point you're making here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a comment too.
What's that?
Okay, so Thanksgiving Day I had to work early in the morning. I woke up to such thick fog that I couldn't drive faster than 30 miles an hour, and I probably shouldn't have been driving that fast. So that restricted a lot of vision.
Yeah, right.
Yes. so that, that just makes sense what you said.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
it does.
so I had this dream. We were in Oklahoma, and I was looking off to the east, and I remember seeing these missiles. They were coming like they were like this, and at a certain altitude, they broke off into smaller missiles, and they went, and it was like all the way to, somehow I knew. Don't ask me how I knew this, but in my dream I knew that they were destroying the Mississippi River. That these bombs were coming from the Gulf of Mexico. It looked like from the angle of it looked like it would have been from like the Florida Keys area, maybe just inside the Gulf. They were coming this way, and then as they came, they broke into individual missiles, and then they just landed in a line like that. So there was like 2 or 3 missiles coming, and then they broke up. And I'm like, I woke up after I had that. It was so real. The dream was so real. I remember I called a friend of mine. I'm like, okay, I've never even seen something like this before. Does it even exist? Are you familiar? And he's military background. He's like, oh yeah, and he told me what they were called and whatnot. And I told him, I said, but this was different. I said, gosh, I hadn't thought about this. I said, the pillars that came out of these were really, really tall, and the plumes were not like the big Hiroshima Nagasaki nuclear blast was a big wide mushroom. It was a wide base and a huge plume on top. These were tall, like aspen trees, and then they bloomed at the top, but they were very tall. The pillar was very high. It was very tall, very high, and then the plume was much smaller than like a typical atomic blast that I've seen in textbooks and things like that. And I hadn't thought about that, but Joel, that scripture in Joel, the plumes of smoke scripture that we talked about, that there'll be blood, fire, and pillars of smoke. That term for pillar of smoke means a pillar that looks like a tall palm tree. That's what that term is in Hebrew, that Joel used. Anyways, but he's like, no, that's what they do. He told me what they were. Anyways, I guess it exists. I didn't know that. The first time I'd ever seen it was in my dream, and I asked about it. So I'm expecting some kind of a nuclear attack at some point to go along the Mississippi. And it was interesting because when I was asking him, he's like, that's a really interesting idea because have you ever studied how much we use the Mississippi and what it's for? And he said, and did you also know that there are only 4 places that you can cross? I'm like, no, I didn't. I mean, it's a definite. It would be a definite way for somebody to separate the East from the West for sure. You'd be able to blow up the ability to transport back and forth, number one, but then you wouldn't be able to cross it with military vehicles or anything else either, right? I mean, it would be unusable. Not to mention the fact that it would poison the water and that would flow into the Gulf of Mexico, and who knows what that would do. It's all sorts of damage could happen. But it was interesting when I read things like this in the Revelation that I keep going back to thinking, seeing a lamp flying through the air. I mean, how many lamps do you see flying through the air, right? We have to think like John was thinking. What's the best that we can do to help ourselves understand what he was seeing without knowing? Because he would never know what these terms were. He'd never know what a phone was or a missile or, like Joel, he's got the vision and he sees this pillar of smoke that looks like a palm tree. He can't know what an atomic bomb is. It wasn't created yet, right? So anyway, I think what we're seeing in the trumpets, we're seeing some supernatural stuff for sure. Like the blood, being scattered over the earth and a third of the trees dying and all of the grass. That's definitely something I think that's supernatural. But I think it could be that part of the things that we're seeing here is that there's an entrance to war or even more war that's destructive, like nuclear related too. I think it's possible. Anyways, anybody else, thoughts or questions? Anything, comment?
We were thinking about when the mountain fell into the ocean, it would also throw up quite a bit of like tidal wave
It would.
activity.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah, that's like what I was thinking with the east coast of China and the USSR and Japan, Taiwan, those areas, and then the entire west coast, including Mexico. I mean, those land masses would get hit with massive wave, tidal wave. Yeah.
There's also been a lot of, so at Army, as you know, Buck,
Yeah.
And there's also one in Japan that is active again. And there's also another one in China that is currently active again.
Yeah.
And if there was 3 along that line, if all 3 were to go
Yeah.
at the same time or around the same time, we would block out the sun, the moon, the stars. The dust would, the smoke in the air, the dust and whatnot would be huge. It would knock out the Pacific.
Yeah.
The tsunamis it would cause, huge. And wormwood, like you had said, that's one of the things Steve and I used to study. Wormwood definitely is very, very bitter and caused by radiation. And there are 10 huge lakes that are full of radiation poisoning. And if they were to hit those, they said it would fill the rivers. And the rivers would flood with wormwood.
That's interesting.
If anything were to strike them. And the fresh water could be destroyed. And it would kill people. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm interested too. It's going to be interesting to see. I mean, whether we see it or not, it's up for grabs, right? But it'll be interesting.
Nobody knows at the time.
It'll be interesting to see if we do how this all plays out. I mean, at best we have, right? We're asking the Lord and we're saying, God, give us wisdom, give us understanding, help us to see your word, help us to understand. We're going to try our best, and we're asking for revelation, right? Ultimately, we probably still see through a glass darkly when it comes to this. And when we go through it, we'll get a good piece of it. And I think we'll have the patterns. Like, we'll be able to see these patterns, right? I think it's the reason Jesus told us, Matthew 24. He would have never told us those things if he didn't want us to follow him, right? So we just have to keep our eyes open and watch for these things and watch for the patterns and see if they start fitting together, right? Like, I'm watching still, and I'll end with this. I'm watching, and we just finished our election. You know, I'm watching to see what happens. I'm just curious. I'm just paying attention to see what happens between now and March. These next few months, I'm very fascinated with the state of our government, with our nation. I'm very fascinated with what's happening on the pandemic scene. I'm very, very interested, and I can't wait to talk about this when we get into the system of the beast. I'm very interested in what's happening with artificial intelligence, digital IDs. Golly, I've been getting all sorts of interesting stuff on digital IDs and biometrics and whatnot. So next week, when we get together, we're going into the next chapter, which is going to be fun because we actually get to meet the beast, finally. So I told you before that the beast comes, that there are 5 different beasts in Scripture. And so we have to watch so we know which one we're dealing with. They all dovetail into one another, but we have a beast that's a spirit. We have a beast that's a man. We have a little beast that works underneath of the big beast. We have a beast that is a military, or a financial institution. And we have a beast that's a governmental, political institution. So we have 5 different beasts recognized in Scripture. And we're going to meet the demon next week that actually lives in the human body of the man that becomes the beast. The demon spirit that actually inhabits the man we meet in the next chapter. So something to look forward to. And this is interesting because this is where this is where the rubber starts to meet the road. This is where, from here going forward, we've had these kind of general and generic, in a sense, events, global events that are happening, the stuff that's happening up in the heavens and whatnot. This is where it gets real, because what we start next chapter, what we start doing on the 5th trumpet, what we experience is the demon spirit that comes, that actually indwells the beast man. And this is where we start to see what Jesus talked about when you see the abomination of desolation. So this is where we start to set up now Matthew 24:15, and we start to see what Jesus said in Matthew 24:15. Everything that we've experienced to this point is really Matthew 24:4-14. Matthew 24:15 now is what we're going to start on next week. So you'll get to meet the demon that inhabits the beast man next week. So come ready. All right. God's blessings, everybody. Thanks for coming.